gentlemen, you are listening to Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. It's an engaging and enlightening talk show on life, relationships, and the business
It's
of
time
life.
to bring you
Grab a
yet
cup of
another
juice
amazing
and just
episode.
chill.
And now,
Life Well
welcome
Lived
your
by
host.
Omobola Stephen. Live
It's
life.
good to have you on
Live
the
fully.
podcast Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. I'm the host, Omobola Stephen. Now, on the podcast Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen, we share profound, disruptive, yet constructive mind shift conversations that hinges on personal development and self-improvement topics with professionals who are adept in the industry, focusing on personal development and self-improvement topics. Thank you, Dr. Albert Bramante, for joining me on the show Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. Dr. Alberts is the veteran and seasoned talent agent, certified hypnotist, and NLP practitioner. Welcome to the show.
Again, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to have a conversation with you and your audience. So I love what your podcast stands for. I think it's a great message, and I think more stories like this have to be told, and more, we need more conversations on these topics. So I'm really happy to be here and honored to be here.
Absolutely. Such an honor to have you, Dr. Alberts, indeed. We would like to talk about the agent and psychological lens, how we can begin to overcome creative self-sabotage from the side of an actor and also as an agent. Because you're an expert in this industry, you've got over 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry. So we are certain that you're going to offer insightful and transformative interview discussion today on Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen, even as we hope to transform the minds of the audience. So what initially led you to connect self-sabotage directly with the challenges faced by performing artists?
Well, like I said, when I first started 20 years ago, as an agent, I was working. The actors that I was working with at the time were being their own worst enemy. Their messages weren't adding up. So, like, what was happening was they were telling me on one hand, verbally they wanted to work, they wanted to find work, they wanted to audition, but every time I would get them auditions, they would sometimes come up with excuses why they couldn't do it, or would just blow them off completely. And I couldn't figure out the disconnect between their words and their actions. And that kind of led me. Now, it wasn't every actor who was working; it was only a few, but it was still enough to make me question what was going on here. Why there was a disconnect, and so part of my when I was enrolled in the PhD program, we had to do a dissertation, a thesis, and so our advisor, at the time, my advisor had advised us to select a problem that kind of keeps us up at night. And so at that time, I was like, almost banging my head against the wall. Why are these actors self-sabotaging? And why are they being their own worst enemy and preventing themselves from being, successful in an overly competitive industry to begin with? So when I presented that to my advisors, they were really fascinated by that. And they were really fascinated by, the answer to that question, like, why was this happening? And so that's when I decided to shift my focus to, working with, self-sabotage. And so I did, dissertation on that topic, at the time, my research, to kind of find an answer to what was happening, what was really affecting our industry. And so there were a couple of things that I found, through my research. And then after I received my dissertation, received my PhD, my advisors had indicated that I should publish, this information. So it took me a couple of years, but eventually I wrote a book to kind of encapsulate what I did for my dissertation. So, and that's where Rise Above the Script came in, which was published in 2024. The actor's mindset, the challenge of being an actor is different than traditional 9 to 5 or traditional jobs, because you constantly as an actor have to prove yourself every day, when it comes to auditions and meeting new people. And it's a gig economy, not necessarily a job economy, a career economy. So you're only as good as your next gig as an actor, and you don't know when you're going to get the next gig because it's not a stable environment. So it can, so you can be out of work for months as an actor, and there's no like really end in sight. So there that adds time that actually erodes the psyche of the actor. And so that can lead to, problems of self-doubt. Then the imposter syndrome comes in, like is this really for me? Am I doing the right thing? Am I really an actor? And these things start popping up, and then the quality of your work, because if your mental game or your mental strength isn't there, the quality of your work is going to decline. And that goes the same with with actors or with anybody really. I mean, if you don't believe in yourself or you start doubting yourself, your personal effectiveness and your personal power is going to decline.
Right, really, experiencing the imposter syndrome, you just highlighted that earlier on, it can be really particularly debilitating for artists who often work in an industry where success is subjective and difficult to measure. You are in the entertainment industry, and I'm sure you're aware of what I just said now. So, what are some root causes of the imposter syndrome, and how can they be overcome?
Well, the imposter syndrome is really the whole notion of that you believe that you're a fraud in a sense, or that you're not really authentic, or that you're not equipped to get the message out, or equipped to do what you're doing. You don't believe that you're capable of doing what you're set out to do, and that people are going to find out. You're going to be found out eventually. That's the whole crux of the imposter syndrome, and that comes into, again, uh, previous failures, previous, other instances that can come in. Um, the way, kind of like to overcome that, is first admit, kind of know what's happening. To know what imposter syndrome is, and so I think we need education, like you know these podcasts, to kind of shed light on the term. Um, and I think, I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with someone who has imposter syndrome. I think that's actually a sign that you don't care about what you do. And I think if we can reframe that as you care what you do and you want to do the best foot forward, and then, casually remind the clients or people we're working with, you trained for this, whatever it is you set out to do. So being an actor, you train being an actor. You spent, 3-4 years in getting either a conservatory or an act or a degree in acting or theater. So you trained really hard for this. So you are capable of doing it. So I think just reminding people of their training, of their background, and reframing, imposter syndrome. Like, look, you care about what you do, and you want to put the best foot forward, and you can do that, and you're capable of that. If you simply, I don't. I mean, I don't want to do cliches about, oh, just believe in yourself. That sounds a lot easier. It's easier said than done. But it just comes in through time, and using affirmations like, I deserve to be here, or I deserve a seat at the table, and really connecting to your self-worth is important here, and your self-esteem. That's a big factor. So, and a lot of times with actors, their families may not always be supportive. So, especially if they don't understand the business. So they may get messages from their family saying, "Oh, you must, you should quit, or get a real job," in a sense. So they hear these messages from, and I say sometimes well-intentioned family members. You know, their intentions, they really love their family member, but the messages that they're sending are wrong, or incorrect, or and it can actually cause damage, on their self-esteem and their psyche.
Dr. Albert, is there anything like a toxic high self-esteem? Now, if there is, how is it important for artists to be able to distinguish between toxic high self-esteem and a healthy self-esteem?
Yes, well, there's what really a one-word answer to distinguish that, and that's humility, being humble. Being a person with healthy high self-esteem. They believe that they're worthy. They believe that they're effective in what they're doing, but they're also humble. So the fact that they're open to feedback, they're open to learning, and they're open to being coachable. Because as human beings, to be successful, we always have to learn. There's not a day. As long as we're living, we should always be learning something new every day. And so that's the big difference. Now, with toxic high self-esteem, that's related a lot to even low self-esteem because it's fragile. So a person with like toxic high self-esteem is not going to be open to criticism. They're not going to be open to being coached. So when you give them a helpful suggestion or constructive feedback, they're going to get defensive. They're going to get angry. They're going to maybe even lash out, say you're wrong. And sometimes with actors, when you give them a critique on their performance, they will take offense to that. Like, how dare you do that? How dare you? Say this. I've worked really hard. I'm a good actor. And the thing is, they feel threatened by that because it's they're not being like, and so the ego is not always being stroked. And so that's a big factor with self-sabotage because you're not going to be open for the feedback that you need to hear that you need to grow. Instead, you're going to be closed-minded off of that. And so therefore, you're going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again.
Right. What would you like to say, or what advice would you like to offer to the artists out there, the habits that can help them to be productive? Can you share?
Sure. Well, to be productive, I mean, the one thing is to create actions. A lot of people have a lot of ideas, which is great, and that's the first step. But to create actions, if you want to be productive, one of your best friends should be a calendar. Your calendar. So put stuff down on the calendar because when you put it on the calendar, it becomes real. So if you want to be productive, whether it's be a writer, be an actor, or put out or be a content creator, the best thing to do to be productive is to put it on a calendar. So let's say somebody says, I want to write some articles. Okay, well, when will you do that by? When? And then when you hold yourself accountable by the calendar, that will be more effective. So otherwise, it becomes ideas or someday. And that's a big problem with a lot of people. They're like, well, someday I'll do this, or someday I'll do that. Well, if you want to be productive, start setting accountability by putting it on your calendar and scheduling it. And once you're able to do that, it becomes real. It becomes a reality. And it becomes more than just a to-do list. Because, you'll see a lot of people with so many ideas and year after year after year, and nothing is done. They're not doing anything based on the idea. So to be productive, I would say the biggest secret or tip is to put it on a calendar and hold yourself accountable, because that'll hold yourself accountable.
Doctor, what do you think actors often struggle with?
They struggle again with the ability not to find employment. So again, it's just that they're putting themselves out there by being vulnerable on auditions and then not hearing anything and not, getting much work. And so that time after time will, start to sometimes chip at the self-esteem or chip at the factor, their personal self-worth, because it's like over and over again, they're not reaching what they need to reach in a sense. So I think that's sort of like some of the things that actors are struggling with. So, and it's just the constant instability of the business. You know, there is no 9 to 5 job. This is not a 9 to 5. This is you find work when you can get it, sort of a thing.
Thank you for sharing that with the audience. But really, there are jobs out there. Don't you think the issue of politics often comes into play when it comes to getting a job in the entertainment industry?
Sometimes it can, it's like who you know. Um, there are some, cases where it could be nepotism or favoritism that can, certain get the job, like being related to the director or the producer. That can come in, and that can also add in time too, where someone may be qualified for it, but they don't necessarily get the job. And that's also another thing too. With actors, you can really give a great audition or a great interview, and everything lines up and looks well, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get the job, and that can be frustrating over time because there's a whole host of reasons. It could be, this is all sometimes a shallow industry where you could be an inch too short or an inch too tall or the wrong eye color, the wrong hair color, which has nothing to do with your performance. So that's where I think politics can play a role.
Dr. Albert, you've been in this industry for over 2 decades, right? So you have a lot of professional experience and also personal experience. Do you think that actors receiving enough support at all in terms of the role they play as an actor or as an artist in the industry? Is there enough support?
Um, not maybe not as much as they should, because again, sometimes their loved ones might be pulling them in another direction or trying to pull them in another direction of, like, again, getting that quote, and I use air quotes, a real job, because that's the message they're being told, and so that can wear down over time. That's why a lot of actors wind up, leaving the business and getting jobs, corporate jobs or other types of 9 to 5 jobs to kind of, survive. So there's not a whole lot of support system. However, actors support each other. So the biggest support system for actors is kind of like other actors, and other creatives. So I would say lean into those networks too. Support other actors, doing support groups, doing whatever you can do just to be a part of a community. Because the more that you remain part of a community, the more you're going to stick to anything. And that's with any profession in life. Community is so important. Being part of a community.
Right. Thanks
And
for sharing your thoughts. Yes. Thank you so much for that. In your book, you talked about the need for performing artists to rise above the script. So the question on the minds of the audience is, what is the reason behind the book theme,
okay,
rise, yes, above the script? Do you have any personal experience or industry experience to bring home the point?
yeah. Well, I talk. I'm not talking about necessarily a physical script like a movie script or a play script. I'm talking about the script in your mind. The
Mm.
script that you tell yourself every day. So again, with self-sabotage, the way it's very sneaky is we don't realize we're doing it. It's not a conscious thing. And we're just sometimes running on automatic scripts every day. So I talk about rising above that by transcending, by overcoming those scripts and changing them to, you know, one of the things I often tell actors, never introduce yourself as a starving artist or a struggling artist or a aspiring actor. You are a professional working actor. And when you start telling yourself that, our words become reality. And the reality around you will start to shift. It may not happen right away, it may be slow and gradual, but it will shift over time if you start talking and referring to yourself as a professional working actor. And that's not just for actors, for anybody really in any industry. You're a professional, and you're a working, professional, and whatever profession you're in. If you start referring to yourself in that way, you're changing the script in your mind. You're changing the script of your reality. And when you shift your reality, you start to shift things around you, in a sense.
Absolutely. Now, for the benefit of the audience who may not have an idea of what the Big Five is, can you share? I have two in one question, please. Once you've done that, how does understanding personality traits like those from the Big Five, how can it help artists in their personal and professional journey?
Sure. So the Big Five was created in the 70s and 80s. And what the Big Five is, it really condenses personality traits down to five, down to core five that we all share on certain degrees. So they are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And I'll go into each one of these as to how it's important for actors. The first one is openness. So to be an artist or to be an actor, you have to be creative, and that's what to be creative, you have to have an open mind, and that means being open to new solutions, new ideas. And so a lot of people are not open, like they're closed minded. They'll do the same thing over and over again. They'll order the same thing on a menu no matter every restaurant they go to, because they're not open. They're not really open minded. So to be an artist and to be creative, you have to be open minded. So openness is really important. Try out new experiences, do different things every day. Challenge yourself, meet new people. The next trait is conscientiousness, and that refers to discipline, focus, and that's one of the biggest predictors of life success in any field is being conscientious, by being disciplined and by being focused. So what winds up happening, especially for actors, that means, being disciplined, having a good business sense, keeping a calendar, keeping a planner, keeping your training, keeping your people skills up and your business skills up. And that's really important, for any field, or not just for actors, but to have a good business sense and be disciplined and focused. The next trait is extroversion. That's the trait number three. And that refers to how communicative you are. Now, this could be a challenge, especially if you're an introvert, who doesn't like, communicating with a lot of people. But you still have to put yourself out there. And as an artist, you have to meet new people, you have to network. So you have to be somewhat, push yourself to be an extrovert to some level. Now, that doesn't mean being in life of a party or going to these, large events, but you still have to have the confidence to be able to communicate with other people, and to put yourself out there. So, and the next part of that is agreeableness, and that refers to how open you are to suggestions, to changing things, to listening, incorporating those suggestions. And part of that is being coachable. So you need to be coachable as an actor and as any, even as any entrepreneur. You have to be open to some sort of coaching and change to be successful. And then neuroticism refers to how well you respond or how affected you are by change. Now, people that are highly neurotic get stressed out easily. They get anxious very easily. So, and what I found in my research, how this all ties into actors, if you're high in neuroticism and low in conscientiousness, that's going to be more of a recipe for self-sabotage. So, and what I found, and a lot of research has found that when people overestimate how conscientious they are, they don't realize that they may need work in this area. Most people say, "Well, I'm very conscientious," and when they actually take a personality test to measure that, they realize they're not as conscientious as they think they are. And so for an artist, if you're high in neuroticism, like easily stressed and easily reactive, but then low in conscientiousness, that's going to be recipe for self-sabotage. And so that's how I would say that all connects.
Doctor, do you have any exciting news, perhaps any important projects you think it's going to add value to the audience? You can share if you have any.
Sure. Well, I'm working on right now. I'm building a recording library on my website. Different audio recordings, meditation recordings, based on productivity, sleep improvement, athletic performance, fears, leadership, public speaking. And I'm constantly building that. I'm also myself at some point this year going to be launching my own podcast, which is something I'm really excited about and happy about. So that is something that's really good. And also, I'm writing, outlining 2 more books at the moment. So that's by 2026. I aim to like this. I would say March, April of 26. I aim to have those books available.
Good to know. Thanks for sharing that with my audience. Happy to know that you're joining the club of the podcasters. Happy to know
Yeah,
that.
I really enjoyed guesting on them, and I'm like, I want to start my own, and then kind of return the
That's
favor
the
and bring.
spirit. That's the spirit. Thank you so much for sharing that with the audience. I'm looking forward to the podcast indeed. Can you share your social media handles on your website so we can connect and learn more
Sure,
about you?
absolutely. Well, you can find me at albertbramante.com, my first and last name. You can also on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn under Albert Bramante. On Instagram, I'm Dr. Albert Bramante. I post a lot of content. So you can follow me on these platforms. I'd be happy to have conversations. You can always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out directly.
Absolutely. So, where can your book be accessed?
Sure,
Like,
you can find it on Amazon, Rise Above the Script, confronting self-doubt, mastering self-sabotage for performing artists. So it's available on paperback, Kindle, ebook, if you're, or audiobook, if you're, an audiobook person, like Audible, Spotify, where you can find most major audiobooks.
amazing. Thank you once again, Dr. Albata Bramante. You're a veteran and seasoned talent agent, certified hypnotist, and NLP practitioner. Now, you've had over 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry. We really appreciate your time providing this insight to the audience of Lively Omobola Stephen, especially how actors can begin to improve themselves professionally and also personally, sharing these tips and strategies that can help them by. We wish you best of luck in your podcasting journey ahead and also in your book projects, Doctor.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. And again, I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, honored to have you once again. It's been Lawali Omobola Stephen. I'm the host of Omobola Stephen. Now, if you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the podcast, you can do so on any podcast distribution platforms or any podcast course promotion platforms. And I guarantee you, you're going to have an absolutely life-transforming insights that are provided by expert and professionals in the industry who've been there and done that, all about personal development and self-improvement topics that is going to pivot the positive changes that you and I need in our life and in our career as a whole. Till I come your way, I always need you to stay safe. I talk to you soon. Thank you once again, Doctor. That was a great show.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.